Hey everybody. I hope everyone's doing well, staying safe, staying healthy, and enjoying quarantine as much as I am. Of course, I'm here to present my project, which I did on the Jomsvikings. So, my research question is: did the Jomsvikings exist? To what extent did they exist? And what is the historical consensus for their existence? My thesis is that the Jomsvikings, or at least a group that would become mythologized as the Jomsvikings, existed in history, but the story that we know of them from the saga was a mix of both history, myth, as well as 13th century ideas superimposed upon the group. A lot of what is known is either pulled directly or at least begins with information gleaned from the sagas, which were written in the 12th and 13th centuries, including the Heimskringla, the saga of Olaf Tryggvason, and the most famous in regards to the Jomsvikings being the saga of the Jomsvikings, which details the founding of the order. Um, According to the saga, um, the Jomsvikings were founded by a warrior called Palnatoki. Now, Palnatoki was cast out from the service of King Svein Forkbeard of Denmark for slaying his father, King Harald. Because of this, Palnatoki fled to a place referred to as Vinland, where the king named Burislav received him and gave him the island of Yom if Palnatoki would serve Burislav and defend his lands. Yom was said to be located on the southern coast of the Baltic in what is Mecklenburg and Pomerania today. The area was inhabited by a pagan people known as the Wends at the time, hence the name Wendland. Um, the stronghold of Jomsborg, which is the stronghold that the Jomsvikings were operating out of, is supposedly synonymous with a town that is today known as Volin. Now, Palnatoki established the fortress of Jomsborg and wrote the rule of the Jomsvikings. The rule of the saga was extremely similar to the rules of later military orders like the Templars and Hospitallers, which were operating in their prime at the time of the writing of the saga. The rule reads that the first of their laws was that no one might join the company who was over 50 or under 18. All members were to be between these ages. Kinship must not weigh when considering for membership a man who wished to join. No member was to flee from any man who was his equal in bravery and as well armed as himself. Each member must avenge any other member as though he were his brother. No one was to utter words of fear or be afraid of anything, however hopeless matters looked. All the booty brought in from their expeditions was to be carried to the standard of whatever value, big or small, and anyone not abiding by this rule must leave the company. No one within the fort was to start a quarrel, and if news of importance came to any man's knowledge, he was not to have the temerity to make it known to all, because Palnatoki was to announce all news. No one was to have a woman in the fort, and no one was to be away for more than 3 days. And if it became known after a man had been admitted into the company that he had earlier slain the father or brother or some other near kinsman of a member, Palnatoki was to be the judge, as he was to be also of whatever other differences arose among them. They were considered the greatest of warriors, with hardly any of their equals in that time, and were called the Jomsvikings. So these similarities show just some of the later medieval ideas that the saga writers cast back in their tellings of their ancestors. However, the more historically accepted theory as to the foundation of the order is that they were founded by the famous king Harald Bluetooth of Norway and Denmark. He supposedly founded the order that would later become mythologized as the Jomsvikings after being deposed by his son Svein Forkbeard and fleeing to what is Poland today, and establishing a stronghold, garrisoning it with winds under the command of Danish captains. There's also archaeological evidence tying Harald to the Jomsvikings in the form of a golden disc discovered 6 miles from Volin in 1840. Interestingly, by an ancestor of the actor Ben Affleck. It's kind of cool. This disc, referred to as the Crimson disc, bears the imprint of several crosses and a Latin inscription which translated to Harald Gormson, King of Danes, Skane, Jumna, and Oldenburg. Jumna is another name for the town of Volin, indicating Harald's importance and dominance over the region. The location of Jomsborg in the shape of the stronghold of the Jomsvikings is one of the most widely debated topics in regard to the existence of the group. It's generally agreed upon by historians that the image of Jomsborg as a stone fortress with an artificial harbor that could hold 300 longships and was covered by a stone archway with a raisable iron gate is likely an invention of the saga writers of the 13th century. As cool as it would be for a place like that to actually exist. The scholarly consensus is that Jomsborg is synonymous with the town of Wolin, which is within Polish borders today, which was mentioned in Adam of Bremen's 11th century writing, The Deeds of the Bishops of Hamburg, as Jumna, but also known as Julin or Veneta. The town itself possessed no fortifications historically, especially none that functioned like the ones ascribed to the literary image of Jomsborg, but it did function as a popular trading port. Adam of Bremen wrote in the Deeds of the Bishops of Hamburg that Jomna was a most noble city that affords a very widely known trading center for the barbarians and Greeks who lived round about. It was likely a town with a majority Wendish population, but with a Danish garrison. Despite this, Wolin was probably frequented by peoples from all over northern Europe due to its function as a bustling merchant town. This is also indicated by Adam of Bremen when he wrote, "It is truly the largest of all cities in Europe, and there live in it Slavs and many other peoples, Greeks and barbarians." So, while Wolin itself may not have been fortified, there was a hill nearby that possessed a keep and fortifications called Silderberg. It's likely that Silderberg and Wolin were built at the same time and not independently of one another. N.F. Blake, a prolific historian and translator of the Jomsviking saga, notes that the building technique of the wall has much in common with that used in Viking camps around Denmark. So, despite the differences between the description of Jomsborg in the saga and the actual construction of Wolin, it is likely that in the 300-year gap between the actual group's existence and the writing of the saga, that some embellishments were made to fit the genre of literature that the sagas are. The saga of the Jomsvikings also makes the Jomsvikings out to be some of the greatest warriors of their time, however their actual battle record is not so impressive. René Chartrand, another historian, wrote in regards to the Jomsvikings' famed prestige that the truth of the matter would appear to be somewhat different. However, since all three of the major campaigns in which the sources claim the Brotherhood participated in ended in disaster for their employers. So these battles, which, as Chartrand mentioned, didn't end so well for the Jomsvikings. The first was the Battle of the Plains of Fyrisvellir near Uppsala, which occurred in the early 980s. In this battle, Styrbjorn the Strong fought against his uncle Eric the Victorious, who would earn his nickname after this battle, in order to gain control of the crown of Sweden. Styrbjorn led the Jomsvikings at this point, and they accompanied him to this battle. According to legend, the battle was lost because Eric made a pact with the god Odin, who delivered victory to Eric against Styrbjorn and the Jomsvikings. The second famous battle in which the Jomsvikings partook was the Battle of Hjörungavagur. This was a naval battle that took place in 986. The battle was instigated by Hakon Sigurdsson of Norway in order to establish his independence from Denmark and from Harald Bluetooth. Again, the Jomsvikings, who were fighting on the side of the Danes on behalf of King Harald, who was, according to history, their leader and founder, were defeated, resulting in the independence for Norway under Hakon's rule. N.F. Blake states that it's probable that the Jomsvikings did take part in the battle, as most scholars have accepted. So the third battle that the sagas claim the Jomsvikings participated in was the Battle of Svolder. Now, this battle was fought by Olaf Tryggvason on behalf of Norway against a Danish and Swedish coalition. Olaf fought for similar goals as Hakon, hoping to preserve Norwegian independence from Danish rule and to stymie the spread of Christianity into Norway. The role of the Jomsvikings in this battle is reportedly one of betrayal. They sailed with Olaf's fleet, but led him into an ambush and switched sides, fighting against Olaf. Gwyn Jones, who's a famous scholar of Norse and Anglo-Saxon history, notes that by Snorri's account, the Danes of Jomsborg Wolin would betray the returning Olaf and a mere handful of his ships into an ambush laid by the kings of Denmark and Sweden and Jarl Erik by the island of Svold off Rügen. Though this treacherous behavior was likely just the machination of their leader at the time, a man named Sigvaldi. Whatever the case, thus arises the discrepancy between the Jomsvikings' famed prowess and their actual battle record. The only other battle that the sagas mention that the Jomsvikings participated in is their destruction and the destruction of their stronghold of Jomsborg at the hands of King Magnus the Good. Adam of Bremen also attests to Magnus' sacking of Jomna in his Deeds of the Bishops of Hamburg, thus making this event one of the most agreed upon in the sources of the time. Magnus, who was trying to consolidate his rule over his kingdom and the peoples of Volin, and because of this, the surrounding area of Volin rose in revolt against Magnus. And so, of course, Magnus, trying to consolidate his rule, attacked and besieged Volin and destroyed the Jomsvikings there. So they met their destruction at the end of Magnus's sword. So it is from all of this that I've drawn my conclusion. The Jomsvikings were a powerful group of warriors, mercenaries, brigands, and pirates with a fearsome, if undeserved, reputation who lived a pure Viking lifestyle in a world where their breed was dying out, soon to be replaced by Christian feudalism such as what Magnus the Good began to institute before and after his destruction of the order. They were intimately tied to the politics of Scandinavia, with many of their chieftains being kings of the region. But they were never strong enough to operate independently, as their revolt led to their destruction at the hands of Magnus the Good. So, yeah, that's what I have about the Jomsvikings. Thanks.